At his own anniversary gala, my father raised a glass, swept his eyes across 100 guests, and announced to the entire room that I was garbage. Not figuratively, literally. A non-performing asset, he said, and the hall applauded as if they'd just heard a toast to someone's good health. I was standing in the corner, the way I'd stood for all 24 years of my life, and for the first time in all those years, I found it funny. The hall was drowning in gold. Chandeliers the size of my room in the slums, though I didn't know about the slums yet. Give me a minute. Society press. Cameras, glasses of wine that cost more than a used car. The Vohl family was celebrating. And Vohl isn't just a surname in this city. It's half the financial sky over it. My father, Rayden Vohl, raised his glass a second time and said the thing this entire circus had been arranged for. The holding will be inherited by Castle. Castle, my so-called stepbrother. He stood up, gave a little bow, and adjusted the gold watch on his wrist with a gesture he'd probably been rehearsing in front of a mirror since the age of 12. His face is handsome and completely empty, like the display window of a closed shop. The hall applauded. Castle basked in it, and then my father turned to me and smiled. You know that smile, the one a man wears when he's about to hurt you very badly and is already pleased about it in advance? As for you, Rayden, for 24 years you've eaten my bread, and you have not brought me a single cent of profit. I am an investor. I do not hold losing assets. He snapped his fingers. A man in a suit walked over and placed an envelope on the table in front of me. Thin. Your severance is in there. District 13 will take you better than we did. Survive there, and maybe you'll turn into a human being. District 13. At the time, I didn't even immediately understand what that was. I found out later. It's the place where the city dumps everything it has written off. Landfills, rust, broken streetlights. Taxis don't drive there. People get carried out there. A silence settled over the hall, that special sweet silence that falls when 100 well-fed people are waiting to see whether the victim will cry or not. Someone already had a phone up, ready to film. Tomorrow's content. Watch the trash air get thrown out of the Vohl family. The hashtags were practically writing themselves, and then she switched on. Serafina. My stepmother. She lifted a handkerchief to her eyes, her voice trembling like a plucked string. Damien, why must you be so cruel? He's still just a boy. Rayden, sweetheart, I begged for you. I always begged for you. Pure tenderness, wet eyes, a sorrowful arch of the brows. The hall melted. What a woman, what a heart. Except I was standing close enough to see the thing the cameras couldn't. Under the wet lashes, a dry, cold, utterly satisfied gaze. The look of a person who has just won a game she'd been playing for years. Remember Serafina. We'll be coming back to her. Many times, I looked at the envelope. I looked at my father, at Castle and his watch, at my weeping stepmother. And I did not scream. That's important, by the way. Remember that too. I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table. I didn't grab anyone by the collar. Anger is for people who still have hope. I'd buried my hope a minute earlier, along with the surname. I walked up to the table. I took the Vohl family ring off my finger, heavy gold with the crest. The one they'd handed me at 16 for appearances, and that had always pinched. I set it down next to the envelope, carefully, so everyone could see. I picked up the envelope. Thank you, I said, for the clarity, and I headed for the exit. Behind me, 100 stares drilling into my shoulder blades. A whisper spread across the hall like oil over water. Castle muttered something at my back, something witty, probably. He considered himself witty. I didn't turn around, and you know what? For the first time in 24 years, I felt light, genuinely light, as if someone had lifted a sack off my shoulders that I'd been carrying so long, I'd stopped noticing it. I pushed open the heavy doors and stepped out into the night, and in my pocket lay an envelope with a handout that my father wouldn't have missed from one bottle of wine at dinner. He thought he'd thrown me out onto the bottom. He had no idea he'd just handed me a gold mine. But more on that in a couple of minutes. Since you're here, let's do this fast. No tearful flashbacks for half an hour. I can't stand those myself. Who am I? Rayden Vohl, 24 years old, adopted. They took me into the Vohl family as an infant. Why, nobody ever explained. And I never asked. Because in that house, asking questions got you hit. The hitting, by the way, was mostly Castle. We're nearly the same age. He's 2 years older. and his entire childhood. He amused himself by breaking my things and then crying to our father that I'd started it. I got the beating. He got candy for his honesty, a classic of the genre. Serafina protected me, loudly, in front of everyone, with words. Oh, come now. Rayden isn't to blame. He's a good boy. And in private, she arranged things so I wouldn't be let out of my room for weeks. For a long time, I thought she was the only one who pitied me, longer than I should have. Children cling to anyone who speaks to them in a soft voice. My father, Damien, didn't beat me and didn't pity me. He simply didn't see me. I was a line in the expenses to him, a minus in the spreadsheet. He waited for the minus to start turning into a plus, didn't get it, and wrote it off. And there was only one person who looked at me like I was a human being, my grandfather. Old Vohl, Damien's father. He would sit me down beside him and tell me about the city, not about money, about the city, about how it breathes, where its veins are, where its heart is. I didn't understand half of it, but I listened because he was the only one who spoke to me, not through me. Grandfather died a month ago, and that's when it became clear just how unwanted I was in that family, because they stopped even tolerating me for the old man's sake. You know what my grandfather left me in his will? A watch, an old one, mechanical, scratched case, worn strap. To Castle, a stake in the holding. To Damien, the estates. And to me, a watch the whole room quietly snickered at during the reading. I wore it without ever taking it off, not out of sentiment. It was simply the only thing in the entire world that belonged to me and not to the family. And that watch ticked wrong, just slightly, with a barely audible hitch, as if there were something extra inside. I'd noticed it for years and figured, old mechanism, what do you expect? I was wrong. But we'll get to that. Everything in its time. Right now, the slums, District 13, greeted me with the smell of rust and silence. Not the kind of silence you get in rich neighborhoods, where it's purchased with money, the kind you find in places everyone has forgotten. Broken streetlights, mountains of junk, concrete cracked like old skin. Somewhere far off, a dog was barking, and from the sound of it, its situation was no better than mine. I walked and thought exactly one thought. Fine. The bottom is the bottom. At least there's nowhere lower to fall. How wrong I was. And for once, in a good direction. I was tired. My legs ached. I leaned a hand against the wall of an old depot, a huge dead building that had once apparently held trains. Just leaned to catch my breath, and the world exploded with light. Asset analysis system. Activated letters. Right there in the air. Hanging in front of me, golden sharp, and for the first few seconds I decided it was the hunger. That I was about to pass out against that wall, and tomorrow they'd find me here, exactly as Daddy had predicted. But the letters didn't fade. They waited, and then they flowed onward. Object, Transport Depot, District 13. Surface valuation, $0. Status, slated for demolition. True value. Beneath the district lies the skeleton of the old city, an abandoned transport artery connecting 3 districts, a point of perfect convergence of financial flows, potential upon extraction, not model 4000. Do you wish to claim the asset? I stood in the middle of a junkyard, the entire city considered the end of everything, and I looked at the number. Beneath a layer of filth, rust, and trash, under the feet of people who'd been thrown away like me, lay an artery. A bone of the old city, the thing on which a new center would one day rise, if someone saw it before everyone else, and I saw it. I slowly took my hand off the wall, raised it to my eyes, and I swear, a thin golden line ran across the edge of my iris. A scanner. Inside me. I didn't know where it came from, why now, but I knew it was real, as clearly as I knew my father hated me. And then it hit me, really hit me, and I laughed out loud, for the first time that whole evening, hoarse into the emptiness. My father hadn't thrown me out onto the bottom. He, a man who measured everything in the world by money, who prided himself on smelling profit with his nose, had with his own hands driven me out and left me on the single most undervalued asset in the entire country. Because in his eyes, it was garbage. And garbage he didn't bother to count. He wanted me to die in a ditch, and he'd brought me to gold. Thanks, Dad, I said quietly, for the clarity. The system blinked again, patient, Do you wish to claim the asset? I opened the envelope. Inside, the severance. By Vohl standards, pocket change Castle wouldn't have spent on a strap for those gold watches of his. A few bills, buy a gold mine. With this, I looked at the money. I looked at the number times 4,000. And for the first time that evening, I genuinely thought, not about how to survive, about how to seize. But first I had to not collapse from hunger. I found somewhere to sit, an overturned crate by someone's shuttered noodle stall. I sat. My head was spinning. The last time I'd eaten was that morning, back in the life where I still had a surname. And then a bowl appeared in front of me. Noodles, steaming. Cheap, in a cracked bowl, but hot and smelling so good my stomach clenched. I looked up. In front of me stood a girl, about 12, grubby, red-haired. Her hair in 2 crooked pigtails sticking out in opposite directions. Her jacket was about 4 sizes too big, clearly off someone else's shoulders. Freckles, and bright green eyes, alive, the kind I hadn't seen in a very long time. "You're new," she said, matter-of-factly, as if that explained everything. "New folks have a rough first day. Eat." I stared at the noodles, then at her. "Is this yours?" "It's the last one," she shrugged, "but you're all green over there. You need it more." The last one. She was giving the last bowl to me. To a person she was seeing for the first time in her life, whom she'd forget in a minute. Object analysis. Girl named Pixie. Asset of the rarest class detected. Pure loyalty. Market value. Cannot be appraised. Status. Priceless. And that hit me harder than all the lines about arteries and flows. I'd spent the whole evening among people who had everything, and not one of them, not my father, not my brother, not my loving stepmother, would have given me so much as a glass of water for free. And here was a girl who had nothing, and she gave the last of it away. Without a word, without a calculation. The system wasn't wrong. In this trash-choked district lay an asset worth more than the entire artery under the depot. I took the bowl. "Thank you, Pixie," I said, and this time the words meant something completely different than they had at the exit of that golden hall. She waved a hand and skipped back to her stall, and that's when I saw 3 figures coming toward the stall from the other end of the street. Big, cocky. They walked the way people walk when they're the ones in charge here, and they're used to no one talking back. The first one, with a scar through his eyebrow, lazily kicked over a stool by Pixie's stall. "Money tomorrow. And don't go crying about having nothing again. Got it, runt?" Pixie shrank. She nodded, and got smaller the way everyone gets smaller who's been trained to be afraid. I set the bowl down, very calmly, and I looked at the one with the scar, as I learned later, the local hustler who milked the whole district. I memorized his face, memorized his walk, memorized how he savored her fear. You'll be the first one I crush. The system, as if reading me, blinked. Target marked. Priority. Low. Difficulty. Trivial. I liked that word. That night, I climbed onto the roof of the dead depot. Below lay District 13, dark, broken, forgotten, and beyond it, far away, the city burned. The same one that had spat me out. Towers, lights, rivers of light. The Vohl family was finishing its champagne in one of those towers right now and had probably already forgotten my name. I took out the envelope, counted the bills. Laughable money. Humiliating money. A handout tossed to a dog so the dog would go away and die quietly, somewhere far off. But I was looking at it differently now. This wasn't the end. This was starting capital. The system unfolded a map in front of me, small. Just this district for now, and on the map, over the landfills and the ruins, lines emerged, where the artery ran, where the junction was, which pathetic scrap of land would in a year be worth so much that Castle's eyes would pop out of his empty, well-groomed head. I sat on the roof and quietly, without a single shout, declared war. Not out loud, why shout into the emptiness? I just said it inside, slowly, to remember it forever. They gave me 0 and a sentence. Good, I'll give them back exactly 0. But first I'll take everything they love, money, status, name, pride, piece by piece in no hurry. And when they have nothing left, they'll find out who did it. And then I'll already be too high up to hear them beg. 3 targets emerged in the dark. The hustler scar, A warm-up, so the district understands who's in charge here now. The Vohl holding the real war. And something third. Something my grandfather had hinted at on the day they threw me out, in a voice from memory. When they throw you away, Rayden, you'll finally see. I didn't understand yet what that meant, but the watch on my wrist ticked with its wrong little hitch, as if it couldn't wait to tell me. Meanwhile, in a tower on the other side of the city, in a room with no lights on, my stepmother stood at the window with a phone pressed to her ear. The guests had gone. The handkerchief was put away, her face dry, hard, real. He went to 13, she said quietly. Good, very good. The other end said something. No, just make sure he never comes out. Never. She paused, and for the first time something like fear slipped into her voice. You don't understand. If he ever remembers, if anyone tells him who he really is, it's the end for all of us. All of us. Do you hear me? She hung up, and for a long time she looked toward District 13, toward the place where, in the dark, on the roof of a depot, sat the boy she'd spent years driving out of the house. She thought she had thrown me into a grave. She didn't know she had thrown me to the beginning. In the morning, District 13 taught me its main rule. Here, everyone resembles someone. Resembles the person they used to be. And one old man resembled a genius, even though the whole district considered him insane. He sat in the depot yard, hunched in a grease-stained coverall, repairing someone's broken space heater for a bowl of porridge. Sparse gray hair stuck out in all directions. Hands covered in scars and old burns moved on their own, without any input from his head, the way hands move that have done something very complicated, thousands of times. The locals called him Old Grave, the one who talks to pipes. I walked over and held out my hand, just to say hello. He shook it, and the system flared. Object analysis, grave, surface, a homeless mechanic. Status out of his mind, true value, former chief engineer of the city's underground rail. Designed the old city's transport artery, the very one that lies beneath this district. 20 years ago, framed on a false charge. Suspended, ruined, erased. Knows every tunnel under this city by heart. Loyalty, maximum, under one condition, justice. I looked at an old man repairing a stranger's space heater for porridge, and I saw the man who had drawn the bone I was about to build an empire on. Old man, I said, tell me one thing. If someone wanted to bring the underground rail beneath this district back to life, could you do it? Grave went still. Slowly he raised his head and looked at me, for the first time all morning. Really looked. The way you look when you don't trust your own ears. 20 years, he rasped. 20 years I've lived in this hole. And everyone who heard me talk about the tunnels twirled a finger at their temple. His eyes faded, watery gray, suddenly went sharp as razors. You're the first person in 20 years to ask like it isn't nonsense. Son, I've waited for that question longer than you've been alive. And then he said the thing that sent a chill down my spine. They took everything from me, the blueprints, my name, my honor. They stitched together a case, made it look like I caused an accident that killed people. I didn't cause it. I was framed by a corporation. They needed my schematics, and it was easier to bury the engineer than to pay him analysis of the framing method. Pattern match, detected liquidation scheme via fabricated charge. Source of pattern, corporate structure VOHL. I stopped breathing for a second. 20 years ago, when I wasn't even on this earth yet. The Vohl family was already breaking men like Grave for blueprints. My enemy had destroyed this old man before I was born. And now fate had brought us together on the same junkyard. Something clicked inside me. Cold and final. They broke you to steal your work, I said. And I'm going to use your work to bury them. Are you with me? Grave wiped his hands on his coverall, stood slowly, heavily, favoring one leg, and held out his palm a second time. This time, not to say hello. Where would I go, he said. I've been waiting 20 years for you. The first one, not a target, an ally, my right hand, and viewer. Remember this moment. Everything Grave lost. He'll be paid back in full, I promise. That comes in the 6th act, so be patient. Next, I needed money, and the only money I had was one envelope. The following day, I went to the district office where they registered plots in District 13, a cramped, stuffy little room where a bored clerk couldn't remember the last time anyone had bought anything here at all. Why would they? It's garbage. I put my father's envelope on the table and jabbed a finger at the map. This plot, the depot and the land under it. The clerk looked at me, looked at the envelope, looked at the plot, and burst out laughing. Kid, you sure? It's a junkyard. There are rats bigger than dogs out there. For this money, you could, I don't know, eat decently for a month. I'm sure. Process it. He processed it, snickering. Called a colleague over. Come look at the idiot who bought a dump. The colleague laughed too. Wonderful. Laugh, boys. In a year, you'll be telling your grandchildren that you personally registered the first plot of the man who redrew the entire city. And you'll lie and say you understood it all right away. I took the papers, folded them, and said calmly on my way out, I just bought the future center of the city for the price of a lunch. Thanks for the efficiency. The door closed behind their laughter. It didn't touch me. People always laugh at those who see further than everyone else, right up until the moment they have to scrape their jaws off the floor. But the clerk's laughter reminded me of a problem. I had one plot. I didn't have a single cent left for a second. And to make the artery work, I needed the neighboring pieces, equipment, people, capital, all of it, and fast. The system blinked as if it had heard me. Insufficient capital for direct acquisition. Recommendation: gather people first. People are the asset that produces capital on its own. Logical. I had no money, but I had a whole district of people the world had thrown away, like me, which meant a whole district of undervalued assets. Over the following days, I walked through 13 and touched people. Literally. I shook hands, helped lift a crate, held a door, and rid them. The system cracked them open one by one, and every time I saw the same thing, a diamond the world had mistaken for glass and discarded. A woman, around 40, was mopping floors in a diner. Tired, quiet, with dimmed eyes. Vera, former top analyst at an investment bank, sees the movement of capital 3 moves ahead. Fired 8 years ago, got pregnant at an inconvenient time for her boss. Blacklisted, has been mopping floors ever since. A teenager was zipping around the yard with a laptop wrapped in duct tape. Everyone thought he was strange. Knox, 17 years old, self-taught. Hacks systems that teams of 100 people designed, expelled from 3 schools and 2 orphanages for being unmanageable. Translation: he was smarter than everyone managing him. A grim man was sketching something in charcoal on the wall of a garage, just like that, out of boredom. The architect designed 3 districts in the city center. A partner stole his projects and bankrupted him. Now he draws on walls because there's nowhere else. I went up to each of them, and I didn't offer money. I had none. I offered something they hadn't been given in years. The world wrote you off for scrap, I told Vera, and I see your real value, and it's enormous. Come with me and I won't give you back a salary. I'll give you back what you are. Vera raised her eyes to me. For the first time in 8 years, someone had told her she wasn't a mop. And just who are you? She asked quietly. To promise something like that. I don't know yet, I answered honestly. But I'll find out, and you'll find out along with me. They followed me. Not for money, for dignity. And you know what? An army that follows you out of loyalty hits 100 times harder than an army that follows you for a paycheck. Any Vohl will confirm that for you, once everything falls apart for them. And here's where the thing happened that I didn't expect. Vera, going through old banking archives, she dug through numbers out of habit, trying to figure out where the district had its growth points. Suddenly froze over one sheet. She stared a long time, went pale, and quietly folded the sheet, hid it. What's there? I asked. Nothing, she said too quickly. An old account, a shell. The kind they launder money through. She paused. Boss, this account is 24 years old. One payment was once run through it, an adoption fee for an infant. 24 years, my age. I reached for the sheet. The system flared and immediately went dark. Object protected. Analysis unavailable. For the first time, the system couldn't read something. Vera covered the sheet with her hand. Not now, she said. And there was a strange gentleness in her voice. You can't find this out like this, in passing on the side. This is too big. You have to arrive at it yourself. I'll keep it, I promise. I didn't push, but I remembered. Somewhere around 24 years ago, someone had paid for an infant, and that infant was now standing in the middle of the slums with a golden line in his eyes. Coincidences that size don't happen by coincidence. The watch on my wrist ticked with its wrong little hitch, as if it knew something. It was time to handle the warm-up. The hustler, Scar. He came for his money the next morning, to Pixie's stall, just as he'd promised. Cocky, with his muscle in tow, certain the whole district was in his fist. 2 thugs behind him. "Money runt," he tossed at Pixie, and she shrank again. And then I stepped between them. Scar looked me up and down, the gray jacket, the calm face, and smirked. "Oh, the new guy. Decided to play hero? You know what happens to heroes in 13? "I don't," I said. "But do you know you keep 2 sets of books?" The smirk wavered a little, because while he was talking, the system had laid him out like a deck of cards. Scar, hustler, weak link found, milks the district, but hides half of what he collects from his own protection, the higher power that gives him cover. He steals from the people who shield him. If they find out, they won't punish him. They'll bury him. Solution, don't hit him, show them. I didn't even have to raise a hand. That's my favorite method, by the way. Why swing your fists when you can just show people the truth, and they'll do all the work for you? "Scar," I said calmly, "for the past 2 years, you've been collecting twice as much from the district as you hand up. The difference goes in your pocket." I did the math. I have the numbers. And you know what happens when your protection sees those numbers? Scar's face changed color before my eyes. First, it went white. Then it broke out in blotches. "You? Who are you? Where did you?" "Nobody," I said. "A former nobody. And now the one who decides who gets paid in this district." That same evening, the numbers landed on the desk of the people who shielded Scar. Knox didn't break a sweat. The hustler's bookkeeping was defended worse than a shed door. Vera packaged it so airtight there was no arguing, and the cascade went off on its own. By night, Scar had lost his protection. By morning, the people who realized it was dangerous to stand next to him. By noon, the money, which those he'd robbed took back with interest. In a single day, the man who'd held the district in his fist turned into an empty space. And toward evening, I found him in the same spot, by Pixie's stall. Only now he was on his knees in the mud in the very place where he'd humiliated her the day before. Soaked, pathetic, like a beaten dog in the rain. "Please," he wheezed. "I'll give it all back. Just tell them. I didn't even raise my voice. That's the whole trick. The quieter you speak, the louder the enemy falls." "The district doesn't pay you anymore," I said. "Tell them upstairs, 13 is closed. It has a different owner now." I turned and walked away, and he stayed there, on his knees in the mud, and the whole district watched it from windows and doorways. And it was no longer watching him. It was watching me. Word that someone had shown up in District 13, someone buying land and snapping the hustler Scar in a single evening, crawled across the city, and the first one drawn to the scent wasn't a Vohl. The first one to come was a smaller vulture. His name was Bran, a mid-tier developer, the kind who profits off other people's misfortune, buys land in dying neighborhoods for a song, waits, resells. He heard some pauper was investing in 13 and decided it was easy prey. Drive over, intimidate, buy it all up for pennies before the fool figured out what was in his hands. He pulled up to the construction site in an expensive car, climbed out, surveyed the pit, my gray jacket, concrete dust, and spoke to me the way the rich speak to people they consider stupider than themselves. Slowly, loudly, as if I were hard of hearing. "Listen, kid, I'm Bran, a serious man. I know you're buying land here for some reason. Probably someone spun you a fairy tale that the slums are going to take off." He clicked his tongue sympathetically. "They won't take off. It's a dump, kid. It was a dump. It's a dump, and it'll die a dump. But I'm a generous guy. I'll buy everything off you. Right now. I'll even give you a little more than you put in so you don't end up the fool. Deal?" He named a figure. A humiliating one. Less than a third of what the land was already worth, and 1,000 times less than what it would become. I looked at him, and honestly, I even felt a little sorry for him, because the system had already broken Bran down into his components. Object analysis. Bran, vulture developer, over-leveraged up to his ears. 3 neighborhoods bought to flip are hanging on him like dead weight. The banks are squeezing. He desperately needs fast land for a fast flip, or he goes under in 2 months. Weak link. He himself is on the brink of bankruptcy and bluffing. He isn't a buyer. He's a drowning man pretending to be a lifeguard. Oh, so he isn't buying me out of pity. He's drowning and grabbing for my land like a log. Bran, I said gently, tell me, how are your 3 neighborhoods in the eastern sector doing, the ones you bought to flip? Selling well? Bran's face flickered. That's none of your business, kid. And the banks? I went on, in the same kind tone. They're squeezing, aren't they? Deadlines burning. You don't need to buy my land. You need to sell something urgently, or in a couple of months your own vultures will be circling you. Am I right? Bran went white. He stood staring at a pauper in a gray jacket who just recited, word for word, the nightmare he'd been hiding from everyone. Where? Who are you? I'm the one, I said, who sees true value. Your lands, my lands, and yours. I stepped closer, so listen to a counteroffer. I'll buy your 3 dead neighborhoods. Now. At the price I name. It'll save you from bankruptcy. And it's coming, Bran. I'm showing you the date. And in exchange, you forget the road to District 13 forever? Deal? It wasn't a question. And Bran understood that. He tried to bluster for another minute, for show, for pride. But I could see in his eyes he was already calculating and realizing that the boy in the gray jacket was holding out the only hand that wouldn't let him drown. Humiliating. But better humiliation than the bottom. A week later, Bran's 3 neighborhoods were mine at my price. And Bran himself left the city, quietly, without his scrap of 13, but alive. Sometimes the best revenge is letting your enemy survive just enough to spend his whole life remembering who spared him. Grave, who'd been watching the whole thing from the side, snorted. You went easier on that one than on Scar? Scar frightened children, I said. Bran was just drowning and being rude out of fear. Different weights. I don't hit those who are already on the bottom. I take their bottom away and move on. Assets acquired, 3 neighborhoods. Actual purchase price, 70% below market. Reputation in financial circles, first mark. Someone has appeared who sees more. The first mark. The city didn't know my name yet, but the city had begun to feel me. After Scar and Bran, the district started to change. Fast. People who'd been milked and frightened for years suddenly lifted their heads. Grave went down into the tunnels, and for the first time in 20 years, ran his hand over his underground rail, and I watched the old man's fingers tremble. Vera built out a scheme for raising capital from nothing. Knox hung eyes and ears across the district that no corporation could reach. The architect began to draw, but no longer in charcoal on a wall. He drew the future. The first building rose over the junkyard in a couple of months. Then a second. Pixie now sold noodles under a roof no one would dare touch, and for the first time she laughed out loud, and I climbed onto the roof of that first new building and heard the thing I'd been waiting for. Territory analysis available. Unfold the city's asset map. Unfold it, I said, and the whole city opened up before me. Not like a map, like a living organism. Towers, districts, roads, and over them, rivers of light, flows of money coursing through the city's veins. Where it ran thick, where thin, where it would turn tomorrow, what would soar, what would burst. I saw the economy of an entire city like a chessboard, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, a few streams of light began to turn. In my direction, toward District 13, a drop. Just a drop for now, but rivers begin with drops. Meanwhile, in a glass tower on the other side of the city, my brother Castle hurled a tablet against the desk. What junction in the southern sector? He barked at his advisors. We lost the transport tender. The city redirected logistics to some new junction. It's slums out there. Who's behind this? The advisors shifted from foot to foot. Nobody knew. Damien, my father, sat in the chair at the head of the table, and for the first time in a long while was frowning for real. Not out of anger. Out of incomprehension. Money was leaving. Tenders were drifting off. And he, the man who prided himself on smelling profit with his nose, couldn't understand where. Find me the one doing this, he said quietly. They were searching for a ghost, and the ghost at that very moment was sitting on a roof in the slums, eating noodles from a cracked bowl and watching the rivers of light turn toward him. The war had begun, and the Vohl family didn't even know who it was at war with. Castle came to District 13 in person to gloat over the upstart who dared to cross the Vohls. There was just one problem. The upstart was me, and he didn't know it. I learned he was coming an hour ahead. Knox intercepted the security details messages. Young Master Castle wishes to inspect the southern sector and personally speak with the party buying up the land. Translation from Vohl into human. Castle wants to drive over, yell at a pauper, and feel like a big man. I could have hidden, sent someone in my place, but why deprive myself of the pleasure? A black SUV rolled into the district, splashing through the puddles. Castle climbed out, head to toe in a 5-figure suit, in polished shoes that survived about 10 seconds in that mud. On his wrist, the same gold watch. His face wrinkled in disgust, as if he'd stepped in whatever this place smells of every meter. He looked around, grimaced, spat on the ground, demonstratively, so the locals could see how he despised them. "Where's the owner of this dump?" he tossed into the air. "I was told some genius is buying up land out here. Bring him to me. I want to look the idiot in the eye, the one investing in a junkyard." I stood 3 meters away, in a gray jacket, with grandfather's watch on my wrist, looking straight at him. And he didn't recognize me. We'd grown up in the same house for 24 years. He'd hit me with those very hands. And now he was looking straight through me, the way he always had, because a man in a gray jacket in the middle of the slums didn't exist in his picture of the world. I was furniture. I had always been furniture to him. That says a lot about Castle, by the way. He didn't recognize his own brother, because he had never actually looked at me. "The owner is busy," I said evenly. "Leave a card." Castle turned to me irritably, looked me over, and I swear he'd already crossed me out internally. The way you cross out a waiter. "Are you deaf?" I said. "Call the owner. Tell him a Vohl is prepared to buy this whole heap. Out of pity. Let him be glad anyone's interested in them at all. Object analysis. Castle Vohl. Potential 0. Everything inherited. Net worth without the family name. Negative. Weak link. Vanity. Cannot stand losing. Wound his pride. And he loses his head and his money at the same time. Thanks, system. I could see it myself. But it's nice to have confirmation." "I'll pass it on," I said, and smiled. Coldly. Word for word. Castle surveyed the district with disgust one more time, got into his SUV, and drove off, very pleased with himself. He was sure he'd frightened the paupers, that he'd shown everyone who's the master of life here. Poor Castle. He'd just personally, with his own hands, asked me to take him for a ride, and I intended to grant the request with particular tenderness. 3 days later, Castle announced a closed auction. He wanted it to be elegant. He wanted to erase the upstart in a single move, buy up the key plot beneath the district, the very junction where Graves' artery converges, and leave me with the useless scraps around it. In his empty, well-groomed head, this looked like a brilliant strategy. He didn't even understand what he was buying. He saw mud and thought he was overpaying out of magnanimity. He didn't know that beneath that mud lay the heart of the whole scheme. The system practically purred. Castle does not know the true value of the lot. He will bid in a frenzy without understanding what for. Weak link active. Vanity. Strategy. Do not outbid him. Make him bid against himself. Oh, it was beautiful. Listen to how this works. A closed auction is one where the participants don't see each other. The bids go through intermediaries. Castle was certain he was fighting a pauper upstart over a dump. In reality, 3 shell companies were fighting against him. All 3 mine. Knox created them in one evening. Vera dressed them up with a nice backstory so they'd look solid. And I didn't outbid Castle. I egged him on. Every time he placed a bid, one of my companies bid just a little higher. Castle raged, raised it. My company nudged it up again and again. Vanity is excellent fuel. It burns as long as there's something to pay with. "Who's that climbing in?" Knox intercepted his call to an advisor in real time and read it aloud to me with feeling. "Some ghost keeps outbidding me. I will not back down. A Vohl does not lose to a dump. A Vohl does not lose to a dump. I'd have had it engraved on a plaque and hung on a wall. if I'd had a wall for that kind of thing. The bid climbed, past the sum you could buy a normal plot in the center for, then twice that sum. Castle was no longer buying land. He was buying a victory over a ghost he'd invented for himself, and he was paying for it with Vohl family money. At a certain point, my companies quietly withdrew, all three, one after another, and Castle won. He bought the junction for insane, monstrous money and drove home happy, certain he'd crushed the upstart, except a junction without the surrounding land, and all the surrounding land was mine, was worth exactly as much as the key to a door you don't have. Nothing. I held the lock. He'd bought the key at the price of a small kingdom. When it finally dawned on Castle, and it dawned a week later, when he tried to build something and ran into the fact that his junction was dead without my plots, his face, I'm told, took on a very interesting shade of green. But the sweetest part wasn't that. The sweetest part was at home, at the Vohls. Damien found out how much his son had spent on the junkyard, and he erupted. "You poured a fortune into a dump?" My father's voice, they say, could be heard 3 floors down. "I hand you the holding, and on your very first deal you spend money on filth a ghost shoved at you." Father, it was a strategy. I wanted to crush the upstart. How was I supposed to know that? A strategy? You were played like a child. Anyone off the street took you, the heir of Vohl, for a sucker at the market. For the first time, a crack ran between my father and his golden boy. A small one, but I saw that crack on my map clearly, like a fault line. Damien doubted Castle for the first time. And a family that begins to gnaw at itself is a family you no longer have to push. It falls on its own. You only have to keep placing the stones. And Serafina, meanwhile, sat quietly. Too quietly, because she was the only one in that family who could actually think, and an unpleasant feeling had begun to scratch at her. Someone was hitting her son too precisely, too deliberately, as if they knew Castle from the inside, as if they knew all of them. Remember this. Serafina was the first to sense something was wrong. She still knew nothing, but she had already begun to be afraid. And Serafina's fear, believe me, is its own separate genre. At that auction, amid the shell bidders and Castle's frenzied panting, sat one real player. She didn't bid. She watched. And she, the only one in the whole city, understood what had actually happened. Avelina Snow, heiress of the Snow banking empire, the coldest woman in this city's financial world. I learned of her when the system highlighted another hand in the rivers of light. Someone else at this auction was seeing more than everyone else. Only one person, and a couple of days later, her analysts laid a report on her desk that, I was later told, made her go silent for a full minute. Across the whole city, an invisible hand was buying up undervalued assets with surgical precision, as if someone could see the future years ahead and was quietly gathering chips while everyone else looked the wrong way. "Find me the man behind this," Avelina said. "I want to know who's playing my game, and playing it better than me." And here's where it gets interesting, because Avelina Snow didn't send assistance. She came herself. District 13. In a white coat, white, in the middle of the rust and the filth, like a shard of ice that had fallen off another planet. Platinum hair gathered in a severe knot. Eyes, ice blue, almost translucent, the kind of gaze under which, they say, boards of directors lost their power of speech. She found me at the construction site, in a gray jacket, in concrete dust. And for a few seconds, she just looked as if she couldn't believe the ghost that had redrawn her city looked like this.
"You're the one,"
she said at last, and her voice was level, like ice on a lake. "Who's buying my city piece by piece?" I didn't turn around right away. I finished what I was doing. Then I looked at her. "Yours?" I asked. "The city belongs to the one who sees its true price. You see half." A pause. "I see all of it." Silence. Somewhere water dripped, off to the side. Grave pretended to be very busy with a pipe, but I knew he was eavesdropping. And then the thing happened that I think hadn't happened to Avelina Snow in a very long time. The ice in her eyes flickered. It didn't melt. It didn't break. There was just for a second a crack of curiosity in it. In front of her stood a man who hadn't gone pale, hadn't fawned, hadn't started groveling. The whole city bowed before her. And a pauper in a gray jacket in the middle of the slums looked her in the eye and told her he saw more than she did. Internally, I'll be honest, I was mildly panicking. because crushing castle, the empty shell, was one thing, and standing across from a woman whose gaze, it seemed, could slice you into thin ribbons, that was something else. But on the outside, I was calm as the concrete under my feet. On the outside, you always have to be calm. That's half of any victory. Who are you? She asked quietly. And the system, of all moments, chose this one. Avelina Snow. Hidden node detected. The snowbank is linked to the Vohl holding by a thread of debt. She doesn't know yet whose side she'll end up on, and neither do you. Thanks. Very timely. The one, I told her, you'll soon need very badly. She looked at me for another second, then barely, at the corner of her mouth. She almost smiled, the way a predator smiles when it's met an equal and hasn't yet decided whether what's in front of it is an ally or prey. We'll see, she said. She turned and walked away, a white blot through the gray district. Grave came over, wiping his hands. Son, he said quietly, do you even realize who that was?
I do,
I said, watching her go. That was my next move. I just didn't specify whether I meant making her my move or her making one of me. Back then, I didn't know that myself yet. Avelina Snow came a second time 3 days later, and this time not to the construction site. She sent a car and a short message. Dinner, 8 o'clock. We have things to discuss. Strictly business, strictly business. I was beginning to understand that this was her favorite phrase for things that weren't business at all. The restaurant was the kind with no prices on the menu, because if you ask the price, you don't belong here. I came in my gray jacket, deliberately. The maitre d' grimaced, but when he saw whose table I was walking to, he swallowed the grimace along with his tongue. Avelina was already seated, in something severe, ivory-colored, platinum hair, ice blue eyes. She looked my jacket over and raised an eyebrow. The man who bought up half the city doesn't own other clothes? He does, I said, sitting down. I like this one. It reminds me where I started. Sentimental, she said, in the tone you'd use to deliver a diagnosis. Calculated, I corrected. People underestimate the man who's badly dressed, and underestimation is a head start. You fell for it yourself on the first day. You decided a pauper in a jacket couldn't be the architect. The corner of her mouth twitched. I didn't fall for it. I was testing. Of course, I said. Everyone says that when they've gotten it wrong. Avelina Snow, heart rate, marginally elevated, pupils, dilated, micro-expression, interest. She is not used to being answered. The whole city fawns over her. You don't. To her, this is new. Thanks, system. Stop narrating my personal life, and we'll be golden. Avelina, not knowing there was a live broadcast of her pulse running inside my head, poured the wine herself, without waiting for the waiter, which for a woman of her standing was almost improper. I looked into you, she said, deeply. I have good people. A pause. And you know what's strangest? Until 6 months ago, you don't exist. Rayden Vohl, adopted, a nobody, cast out of the family. And then nothing, and suddenly the architect, as if you were born the evening they threw you out. Maybe I was, I said. She looked at me over her glass. A long time. And there was something in those ice eyes I hadn't expected. Not a predator's curiosity toward prey, but something quieter. I grew up the same way, she said at last, quietly. In a family where they love you exactly as much as you're useful. Where daughter is a position, not a bond. I learned not to trust people before I learned to walk. She set down the glass. That's why I believe your numbers, Rayden. Numbers don't betray, unlike people. And here's where, for a second, something dangerous hung between us. Two people who'd been taught to trust no one. Understanding, the most fearsome weapon against loners like us. Internally, I panicked a little, because crushing castle was easy, but this sitting across from a woman who looked at you and saw the same loneliness she had in herself, that was far scarier than any auction.
Don't get attached to me, Snow, I said, trying to recover the cold. I'm a bad investment. My whole life is a war that's only just beginning. Avelina smirked
and did the thing I didn't expect. She reached across the table and straightened the collar of my cheap gray jacket, calmly, proprietarily, as if she had the right. I don't get attached, she said. I invest, and I never exit a good position. She withdrew her hand, and for the record, I decide what's a bad investment for me, not you. System. I recommend retreat. The opponent is outplaying you on this field. Probability of a worthy reply, low. Surrender gracefully. Even the system was telling me to retreat. Traitor. Fine, I said. Consider yourself invested. Already am, Avelina said, and raised her glass. To good positions, architect. I raised mine, and for the first time in 6 months of war, I felt something other than cold and calculation. Something warm and extremely inconvenient that I had no intention of giving a name to. Internally, pure screaming. On the outside, stone-faced calm. As always, half of any victory, and Castle, meanwhile, decided to win it back publicly. That, by the way, is the chief error of all the castles of the world. Having lost quietly, they go and lose loudly. To save face after the auction humiliation, he called a press conference. A big one, pompous, with journalists and cameras. And he announced a breakthrough new project by the Vohl holding in the southern sector, a transport junction that would transform the city. The same junction, my idea, Graves' artery. He'd stolen the concept more precisely. His advisors had scraped it together from leaked fragments and was now presenting it as a brilliant epiphany of the Vohl family. He stood on the stage, adjusting his gold watch, preaching about a vision of the future. I watched the live stream from the slums, eating Pixie's noodles, almost admiring the gall. Want me to crash it? Knox asked, cracking his knuckles. Not me, I said. Let the city crash it. Just give it the truth. And we gave it. Right in the middle of the broadcast, the journalists were accidentally sent a packet of documents, clean ones, flawless. Knox got them. Vera packaged them. In the packet was everything. That Castle had bought a useless piece of land for insane money under this breakthrough junction. That the real artery, without which the junction is a dead rock, belonged to another party. That the Vohl Holdings' vision of the future was overpaying many times over for dirt you can't use. One journalist raised a hand. Mr. Vohl, according to our data, the plot you acquired has no access to the transport artery. The artery is in other hands. How do you intend to launch the junction? Castle stumbled. That's not true. We have a second journalist. And is it true you overpaid for this plot by a factor of 40? The auction documents indicate as much. Where did you get? Who told you? A third, a fourth. Hall buzzed. The expert brought on to praise the project, live on air, put on his glasses, looked at the documents, and calmly, methodically, in front of everyone, took the brilliant Vohl breakthrough apart into shreds, piece by piece, figure by figure. And Castle's face, live on air, ran the full cycle, first red, then white, then green, then all of it at once, as if every color of the spectrum had started fighting inside him. The video spread within hours, millions of views, and the cherry on top, in the comments, in the headlines, in the memes, a hashtag stuck. Nash Trash Air. Only now, it was the name for someone else. It was the name for Castle, an irony I laughed at out loud on the depot roof. The nickname they'd used to throw me out of the family came back and stuck to the one who'd thrown me out. The city itself, without any prompting from me, fastened it onto Castle. Sometimes the universe really does know how to make a joke. Damien publicly, in front of the press, reprimanded his son to save the holding's reputation. Castle stood beside his father, white, crushed, and for the first time in his life, he understood what it's like to be garbage in front of everyone. Welcome, little brother. It's not so bad here, all things considered. I survived, after all. That same evening, Serafina shut herself in her study and summoned her man. I want to know who's behind this, she said. Her voice level, but her fingers gave her away. They were trembling slightly. Not some upstart, a name, a face. Who's hitting my son like he can read his mind? 2 days later, the man came back. He laid a photograph on the desk, blurry, shot from a distance, at a construction site in District 13, a figure in a gray jacket. Serafina stared a long time at the blurry face. Something in the set of the shoulders, in the tilt of the head, snagged her, troublingly, at the very edge of memory.
Enlarge it,
she said quietly.
The face, enlarge the face.
The man nodded and went out, and Serafina sat there, staring at the blurry silhouette. And for the first time in 24 years, she was genuinely down to the chill in her fingers, afraid. 6 months. That's exactly how long it took me to turn a thin trickle of light into a river flowing out of the Vohl family's pockets and into District 13. And the most beautiful part, they still didn't know who'd opened the drain. Let me show you how an empire sinks. As it turns out, it doesn't happen with a crash. It happens quietly, tender by tender, partner by partner. Contract the Vohls had won 20 years running suddenly goes to a new player from the southern sector. A logistics company that only ever moved cargo through Vohl junctions suddenly switches to Graves' underground rail because mine is cheaper, faster, and runs like clockwork. Not mine, of course. Mine ticks wrong, but more on that later. Every morning Damien sat down at his desk, opened the reports, and saw a minus, a small one, then a bigger one, then one you could no longer write off as market fluctuation. Money was leaving, and the man who'd spent his whole life priding himself on smelling profit with his nose couldn't understand where. City asset map. Update. Flows redirected. 34% of the transport capital of the southern and central sectors. Vohl holding. Loss of position. Accelerating. Source of redirection. Not identified by opponent. Operation status. Invisible. 34%, and they hadn't even understood they were being robbed. You know the beauty of the invisible hand? You can't strike back at the one you can't see. In the financial circles of the city, I already had a name. Not the real one. No one knew the real one. They'd nicknamed me the architect, a mysterious player who buys up the future before it arrives. Analysts wrote articles about him. The wealthy at receptions guessed who he was. A foreign fund, a secret consortium, a fugitive oligarch. Not to a single person in those glass towers did it occur that at this very minute, the architect was sitting on an overturned crate in the slums, eating noodles from a cracked bowl handed to him by a 12-year-old girl with red pigtails. "You haven't eaten all day again," Pixie grumbled, sliding me a second helping. "Big boss, and you don't think about yourself." "I do think," I said, "just not about food." "About what, then?" I looked at the city lights in the distance, about how to take everything bad people love away from them. Pixie thought about it. And then? A good question. I didn't know the answer back then, but soon someone would supply it for me, by phone, in a voice that should have been dead. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. When a family runs into trouble, a curious thing happens. The family stops being a family and becomes a pack. And in a pack, when there's little meat, they start to gnaw on the weakest. Damien leaned on Castle. "You blew a fortune at the auction. You disgraced the holding across the whole country. Now we're losing tenders. Fix it. Bring it back. Prove I didn't hand you the name for nothing." And Castle, cornered, humiliated, did exactly what all panicking empty shells do. Something stupid. Something big. To win back the lost ground, he decided to take out a large loan to mortgage part of the holding's assets and use the money for a push that would restore his face. Fast money. A fast victory. A fast way to drown. I found out about it before Damien did, and when I found out who Castle intended to borrow from, I set down the bowl of noodles and quietly laughed. The snowbank. Castle was going for money to Avelina's bank, the same Avelina who'd been coming out to my slums for a month now, watching, calculating, slowly leaning my way. Castle didn't know that. To him, Snow was just a bank, cold, big, convenient. He'd stuck his own head in the noose and asked them to pull it tight. Castle Vohl is initiating a loan against the holding's assets. Creditor, Snowbank, Avelina Snow. 60% under your influence and rising. Recommendation? Don't interfere. Let him get in deeper. A debtor is bound more tightly to a creditor than a son to a father. I didn't interfere. I even helped a little through intermediaries. I whispered to the right people at the bank that Castle's project was promising. Let him take it. The more he takes, the longer the leash I'll yank on later. And at home with the Vohls, the hissing turned to open warfare. "You're dragging us to the bottom," Serafina spat, having cornered Castle in the study. "Alone against the assets? Are you out of your mind? If anything goes wrong, we lose half the holding." "And what am I supposed to do?" Castle flared. "Sit and watch this architect strip us bare? Father leans on me. You lean on me. Maybe you should tell me instead where he knows everything about us from?" He stepped toward her, and something new flashed in his eyes. Suspicion. He hits like he knows us from the inside, like he knows us personally. And you, Mother, you've been acting strange ever since they threw that pauper out. Are you hiding something? Serafina froze, and here for the first time, a crack ran between the stepmother and her precious son. A small one, but I saw it on my map clearly, like all the others. Don't you dare, Serafina said quietly. Don't even think in that direction. So there is a direction to think in, Castle said slowly. They looked at each other, mother and son, and between them hung the thing Serafina had been hiding for 24 years. The thing that, as she'd said by phone on the first night, would destroy them all if it surfaced. And I watched this scene with cold pleasure, because the best weapon against a family is the family itself. You don't have to break down the door when the lock is rusting from the inside. That same evening, Damien, without telling anyone, made a move I'd half expected. He hired an outside investigator, not one of his own, independent, expensive, meticulous. A man who knew how to dig where others didn't think to look. Find me the architect, Damien said, laying a thick stack of cash on the table. I don't care what it costs. I want a name. I want a face. I want to know who this ghost is, robbing me. The investigator nodded, took the money, and went to work. And here's where the clock started. For real. Because a good investigator sooner or later digs his way through. And this one was good. Very. I felt it on the map. A new piece had entered the game, and a dangerous one. For the first time in 6 months, someone had begun moving toward me not blind. The game was accelerating. A week later, there was a big charity reception in the city. The kind the rich attend not to help the poor, but to show one another how rich they are. Champagne flowing, dresses worth an apartment apiece, photographers, and in the air, the thick smell of money and mutual contempt. The Vohls came to win back face. After Castle's public humiliation, after Serafina's strange failure with the disinformation, the family needed to show the city. We're still on top. Damien, Castle, Serafina, all three, in full dress, smiling at the cameras and shaking the right hands. And the one who invited me there was Avelina. The whole financial elite of the city will be there, she said over the phone, including your Vohls. They'll come to save their reputation. A pause. I thought you might like to watch it up close. With me. As my business partner. Isn't it risky? I asked. People know my face. Well, they know Rayden the adoptee. If someone recognizes me, no one will recognize you, she said calmly. 6 months ago, you were furniture no one looked at. People don't recognize furniture even when it puts on a suit. Trust me. She was right. That's the curse of people like the Vohls, by the way. They're so used to not noticing the lesser that those lesser people can walk right past them at full height and they won't see it. I came to the reception in a suit for the first time. I traded the gray jacket on the arm of Avelina Snow. And you know what? No one really did recognize me. The guests saw the escort of the city's coldest heiress, mysterious, moneyed, and they wondered who he was, but to no one. Not a single person did it occur that this was the trash of the Vohl family they'd thrown out 6 months earlier. Castle walked past me within a meter, looked straight through me, gave Avelina an ingratiating nod. He didn't know yet that it was her bank that would soon drown him, and floated on, not recognizing his brother a second time. I was beginning to think I could live in the same room as him and he wouldn't notice. And then the circus began. Castle, wanting to shine, butted into a conversation among major investors about the future of city real estate. And as always, he started spouting nonsense, pompous, confident nonsense from a man who mistakes his father's money for his own intelligence. He preached about the prospects of the southern sector, about vision, about how the Vohl family was always a step ahead of the market. The investors nodded politely, out of politeness, and Castle, mistaking politeness for admiration, spread his peacock tail wider and wider. Avelina leaned toward me. Want me to? She whispered. I can drown him with a single sentence. This is my field. Don't, I whispered back. Let him drown himself. Just play along. And I stepped into the circle, a stranger, Snow's mysterious escort. Forgive me, I said politely, addressing Castle. You said the Vohl family is a step ahead of the market. Curious, is it true that the holding recently acquired a plot in the southern sector with no access to the transport artery? Overpaying by rumor 40-fold? The circle went quiet. Castle went crimson. That was strategic considerations which you obviously don't grasp? Possibly, I agreed mildly. I'm just a guest after all. But these gentlemen here, I gestured around the investors, they understand the market very well. And as far as I know, none of them would buy land you can't build on for 40 times the price and call it vision. Or am I mistaken, gentlemen? The investors smiled. Someone snorted. One elderly dealer said openly, without hiding it, "The guest is right, boy. We all heard about your strategy with the southern plot." The whole city laughed at it. Vision. Ha. Castle's face ran the familiar cycle, red, white, green. He searched for a comeback and found none because there was nothing to come back with. The truth is like that. There's nothing to set against it but a lie. And lying in front of people who know the numbers is pointless. And then Serafina rushed up to rescue her son. As always, she floated over, tender, concerned, with her trademark soft smile. "Gentlemen, don't be so hard on my boy. Castle is still young. He's learning." She turned to me, and in her wet eyes was the familiar performance of helplessness. "And you, forgive me, who are you? I don't recall you in our circle." And here it was sweet, because I was looking at the woman who'd spent 24 years breaking me, who stood a meter away and didn't recognize me, and I saw straight through her, true sight, Rayden Vohl. Mask, a caring mother defending her child. Essence, assessing you as a threat, trying to understand who you are and whether you're dangerous. Senses something wrong but can't place it. Micro-expression, anxiety beneath the smile. "I'm the one," I told her calmly, looking straight into her fake helpless eyes. Who can tell a caring mother from a woman playing a caring mother? They're easy to confuse, you know, if you don't look closely. I held the pause. I looked closely. Serafina's smile froze. Something in my words, in the intonation, in the gaze itself, scratched at her, deep, at the level of a memory she couldn't reach. She went pale under the powder, opened her mouth, closed it. "Have we met?" she asked quietly, and for the first time there was no performance in her voice. There was a real, cold fear. "Not yet," I said, "but we'll get acquainted soon, properly." I turned away before she could answer, took Avelina's arm, and we stepped off, leaving Serafina standing there with a white face and Castle, with his reputation destroyed, under the gazes of investors who were already mentally crossing the Vohl family off the list of people worth dealing with. When we'd stepped away, Avelina said quietly, not looking at me, "You just played with them like a cat with mice, right in front of them, and they didn't get it." She glanced at me. That was, she searched for the word, impressive, and a little frightening. "That was restraint," I said. "I could have told them who I am. Watched Serafina faint right here, but it's too soon. Let them suffer a while longer, not understanding which way the wind is blowing. The fear of the unknown grinds harder than a blow." Avelina looked at me for a second, then barely perceptibly, she squeezed my arm, with cold fingers. "Once, remind me never to become your enemy," she said. "You have nothing to fear," I said. "Enemies I take apart, investments I protect." And for the first time all evening she smiled for real, quietly, almost imperceptibly. Avelina Snow. Relationship status. Business partner revised. New status. Does not yield to business classification. Note, congratulations. It seems you now have more than just a system. You have someone, shut up, system. But thanks. And behind our backs, the Vohl family was living out its evening at this reception, not knowing that the man who just humiliated them in front of the investors disguised as a mysterious guest, and the man who'd been destroying their empire from the shadows for 6 months, and the trash they'd thrown out to die were all one and the same me. They'd find out. Soon. But finding out a truth that sighs all at once is, as Vera would say, too big a transaction for one day. Damien, meanwhile, decided it was time to lean on the snowbank directly. That, by the way, is the chief mistake of every Damien of the world. Having lost quietly, they climb up to lose loudly. He sensed Castle's weakness, sensed that the loan was a vulnerability, and did what predators do. He tried to turn the vulnerability into a weapon. He leaned on the snowbank, demanding it crash Castle's loan at the moment of his choosing. Pin the blame on the architect. and, under cover of the chaos, scoop up whatever of my assets it could reach. He was certain Snow was his lever, the old thread of debt between the clans, the one the system had highlighted for me at my first meeting with Avelina. Damien thought that thread was a leash he held Snow by. He didn't account for one thing, that at the other end of the leash stood not a bank. Avelina stood there, and Avelina had been coming out to the slums for months and counting. The Snow board of directors wavered. The debt thread with the Vohls was real, and breaking with such an old partner was a risk. Half the board wanted to obey Damien. He's a Vohl. He's power. You don't quarrel with him. And that's when Avelina stood before the board. I learned of it later, in detail, and to this day, I consider it one of the best scenes of the whole war. But before the board, I met with her, alone, on the roof of my first building, over the lights of the Awakening District. Damien Vohl is leaning on my bank, she said evenly. He wants me to crash his son and you along with him. The old thread gives him a pretext. Half my board is ready to give in. She looked at me. Ice blue eyes, a direct gaze. Give me a reason not to? A business one, not a fairy tale about justice. I didn't give her money. By and large, I still didn't have as much as the Snows did. I gave her something more valuable than money. The truth. I unfolded my analysis before her. Everything the system saw, the Vohl holding from the inside, rot under a golden crust, tenders that won't come back, partners already leaving. Castle's loan, not strength, but a noose. Numbers you can't turn away from. Vohl is a corpse that hasn't fallen yet, I said. You can bet on him out of fear of the old thread and sink with him when he collapses. And he will. I'm showing you when and how. Or you can bet on me. And tomorrow the whole city, which now belongs to the architect, will be your partner. Avelina studied the numbers a long time, very long. Then she raised her eyes. I don't trust people, she said quietly. People lie, betray, panic. I've seen plenty. A pause. But I trust numbers, and your numbers don't lie. Numbers are just the truth, I said, without mercy. Something in her cold face shifted. It didn't melt. Avelina Snow didn't melt. But for the first time, she was looking at me not as a riddle to be solved, not as a threat to be weighed, as an equal she could, for the first time in her life, bet everything on. Then watch, she said. And the next day she stood before her board of directors and did the thing the Snow clan hadn't done in generations. Publicly, coldly, without a tremor in her voice, she severed the debt thread with the Vohls. She announced that the Snowbank would not take part in operations grounded in outdated obligations toward an unstable partner. Translated into human, the Snowbank is no longer with the Vohls. The Snowbank is with the architect. When they reported it to Damien, he stood, they say, staring out the window for 10 minutes. And then he asked quietly, who turned? Snow against me? No one answered. No one knew. That same evening, the investigator Damien had hired knocked on his study with a folder. I found him, the investigator said. The architect. I know who he is. Damien straightened in his chair. The name. The investigator opened the folder, and at that very moment, as if the universe had decided we all needed one more act, the door flew open, and Castle burst into the study, white with rage, waving a phone. Father. They took one of our man's people. We tracked down one of the architect's people. A hacker. We grabbed him. The folder stayed open on the desk, the name unread, for one act. Thank you, universe. Because yes, they'd taken Knox. It was the first genuinely bad news of the entire war. Damien's investigator turned out to be good. Too good. He unraveled the chain of shell companies Knox had created for the auction and the asset buying, and traced his way to Knox himself. And Castle's people, without ceremony, grabbed the kid. 17 years old. My hacker. My man. The one the world had thrown out of every door. And I'd picked him up and told him he was worth more than everyone who'd kicked him out. And now he sat in the basement of one of the Vohl estates, while Serafina personally came down to interrogate him. Your boss's name, she said, and her voice was soft, terrible, the same one she'd pitied me with in childhood. Say the name, boy, and it all ends. Stay silent, and it ends differently. Knox was silent, a 17-year-old kid with a duct-taped laptop, silent before a woman who'd been breaking people for 24 years. The team was in a panic when Knox detected the leak. Vera went pale. Grave clenched his fists until the knuckles whitened. Pixie, when she found out, burst into tears. Knox fixed her music player and taught her how to beat the locals at cards. And inside me something rose that I'd long forbidden myself. Hot, vicious, the desire to simply go and break things. For the first time in the entire war, I felt the cold begin to crack, and the system, my system, which had spoken to me in numbers for 6 months, produced the thing it had never produced before. Warning, emotional state, rage. Rage equals error. Rage is what the enemy is waiting for. Enraged, you are predictable. Cold, you are unbeatable. Calculate, don't feel, calculate. I closed my eyes, took a breath, and forced the cold to come back, because the system was right. Serafina hadn't taken Knox to break him. She'd taken him as bait to lure me out, enraged, predictable, straight into a trap, and I wasn't going to walk in there enraged. I aimed the analysis at the only link that connected Knox to me and was also weak. At the investigator, object analysis. Damien's investigator, meticulous. Unbribable with money, but a weak link exists. 20 years ago, his own father was destroyed on a fabricated case by the same method, by the same corporation. Source of method, Vohl. He doesn't know he's working for the people who broke his family. He's been lied to his whole life about who was to blame. I looked at those lines and quietly laughed, because the universe really does know how to make a joke, and sometimes it makes one in my favor. The same method, as with Grave, as with the investigator's father. The Vohls had been breaking people with fabricated cases for decades, like a conveyor belt, and one of the broken now worked for them, not knowing he was hunting a man waging war against his own butchers. I found the investigator the next day. No threats, no money. I just laid a folder in front of him. Mine. You're looking for the architect, I said. I'll hand him to you. But first read this, about who actually destroyed your father 20 years ago, and by what method, and compare it to how a man named Grave was destroyed, and ask yourself, who are you working for? The investigator read. His face changed. Watched 20 years of lies he'd been fed about his father's death crumble line by line. You work, I said quietly, for the people who break men like you, like your father, like old Grave, for blueprints, for land, for money, and I'm the one they threw away, and who's now returning all of it to them in full. So ask yourself again, who's the architect here? And who's the real criminal? The investigator closed the folder. He was silent a long time, and then he lost the folder with my name in it. He reported to Damien that the trail had gone cold, that the architect covered his tracks too well. And quietly, through his own channels, he pulled Knox out of the basement, filed it as insufficient evidence, as an error in detaining a minor, as whatever, as long as the kid walked free. Knox came back to us at night, thin, frightened, but whole. Pixie hung on him and wouldn't let go for half an hour. Grave silently poured him tea. Vera turned away so no one would see her face. And I looked at my team, at the people the world had thrown away, and that I'd gathered, and understood that the Vohls had none of this, and never had. They have fear, money, and a name. And I have this. People who came back to each other out of hell. That's why I was winning. Not because of the system. Because of this. At the Vohls, that night, it was empty. They'd been one step from the name. The investigator had held the folder in his hands, and again empty. The trail went cold. Snow walked away. The cook turned out not to be their rat. The tenders had drained off. Knox slipped out. Damien stood at the window of his study, and for the first time in his life, the patriarch of the Vohl clan was genuinely afraid. Not angry, afraid. This man, he said quietly, to no one. He sees us inside and out. Every move we make, he knows in advance, as if he knows each of us personally, as if he's one of us. He didn't realize how literally he was right. And in another room, Serafina sat alone, assembling the picture. She was smarter than Damien always had been, and she assembled the pieces differently. A child she was afraid of, a real mother, the precision of the strikes, as if the enemy knew their family from the inside. The method the architect used to hit Castle, as if someone had known where Castle hurt since childhood. Since earliest childhood. And the blurry photo of a figure in a gray jacket at a construction site in District 13. Serafina slowly, very slowly, raised a hand to her lips. "No," she whispered. "No, it's impossible. He'd have died in the slums. He's a nobody. He was always a nobody. He couldn't." She grabbed her phone. Her hands shook. She dialed her man. "The photo from the site," she forced out. "The one you enlarged, the face. Send it. Now. Immediately." The phone chimed. The file arrived. Serafina opened it with trembling fingers. And the world of Rayden Vohl split in two. Serafina stared at my face on her phone screen, and I can only guess at what was happening inside her. But by what came next, I understood. Roughly the same thing that happens to a person who's seen a dead man come to collect a debt. My stepmother's porcelain face, a face that for 24 years had betrayed nothing but calculated emotion, cracked, for real, for the first time. Not a staged tear, not a sorrowful arch of the brows for the public. Pure, naked animal terror. The architect, the ghost who'd stripped the Vohl clan for 6 months. The man who saw them inside and out, struck at their sorest spots, knew each of them from within, because he'd grown up among them. It was me, the trash, the non-performing asset, the boy she'd driven out of the house with her own hands and thrown into the slums to die with relief. He hadn't died. He'd built an empire on her bones, the system in sync, as if it could feel the moment from kilometers away, produced on my end. True sight, Rayden Vohl. Mask, grieving victim. Essence, the chief architect of your downfall. 24 years of intrigue. Current state, fear. Pure, uncontrolled. For the first time, she fears not for her status. She fears for her life, and for the secret. With trembling fingers, Serafina dialed Damien. I know what happened next. By then, Knox was listening to her line.
He's alive.
She breathed into the phone, and her voice, always so level, so honeyed, broke on every word. "Damien, listen to me. The one ruining us. The architect. It's Rayden." Silence on the other end. "That's nonsense," Damien finally said. "That worthless boy, he should be rotting in the slums. He's not rotting. He built a city out there. He bought off Snow. He took the tenders. He ruined Castle. It's all him. Do you understand? The boy you threw away?" She was almost shouting, and through the fear in her voice, something else broke through. Despair. "And that's not even the worst of it. Damien, I have something he must never find out. Never. If he digs his way to it, it's the end of us. Not the money. The end of us all." "The end of what it?" Damien asked sharply. "Serafina, what the hell are you talking about? What have you been hiding from me all these years?" A pause. "Not over the phone," she said, and hung up. I sat on the roof of my building, looking at the city lights, holding grandfather's watch in my hand. It ticked with its wrong little hitch. The thing he must never find out. Never. For 24 years, this woman had been hiding something, and that something frightened her more than the loss of the whole holding, more than exposure, more than me. What could be more terrifying than the collapse of an entire empire? I didn't know yet, but I was going to find out. And the watch on my wrist, it seemed, wanted it too. Castle couldn't take it first, as always. When he learned the architect was me, the brother he'd beaten his whole childhood and thrown out like trash, he couldn't digest the humiliation. Pride is a fragile thing. When it cracks, the shards fly in every direction. He came to my tower. Not the slums. I had a tower now, glass, in the new heart of the city that had grown up where the junkyard used to be. He came with security, with guns, on the edge of hysteria. He broke through the ground floor, rode to the very top, into my office, and froze in the doorway. Because in the chair across from the enormous window, beyond which the city lay, sat me. In a gray jacket with grandfather's old watch on my wrist, calm as ice at the bottom of a winter lake. "You," Castle choked. "You? Me?" I said. "Come in, little brother." "Long time no see." He stared at me, and I watched it all fail to add up in his empty, well-groomed head. The boy he'd despised, the furniture, the nobody, and the master of the city the Vohl clan was now drowning in. "This is some kind of mistake," he forced out. "You can't. You're trash. You're nothing. They threw you out to die. This is mine. All of this should be mine. I'm the heir. I'm a Vohl." And here I stood, slowly, walked to the window. The city burned below, my city, grown out of the junkyard they'd thrown me onto. You're a Vohl, I agreed quietly. You inherited the name. You're 26 years old, and in all those years you've built nothing. Not one deal of your own. Not 1 cent earned with your own head. You were given everything. The name, the money, those gold watches you flash in every room. I turned to him, and I was given 0. And a sentence. Survive, and maybe you'll become a human being, remember? Castle was silent. So look, I said, sweeping a hand at the city beyond the glass. Look closely at which of us has what left. You inherited a surname. I built a city. That's the whole difference between us, Castle, and it was always there. I just didn't have a system to show it before. Object analysis. Castle Vohl. Net worth without the family name. Negative. Without Damien's money. Bankrupt. Without the Vohl surname. A nobody. Potential earned through his own efforts in 26 years. 0. I didn't read it aloud. There was no need. I just said the same thing in words, and Castle heard his gilding being stripped off layer by layer. You know what's funniest? I went on. When you came to the slums to gloat, you stood 3 meters from me and didn't recognize me. 24 years in one house, and you didn't recognize your own brother because you never once actually looked at me. I was furniture to you. I smiled coldly, and the furniture, as it turns out, was counting the whole time. Every word of yours, every cruelty. Castle's face broke out in blotches, red, white, green, all at once. His pride, cracked for good, was looking for something to strike with, and he lunged. Swung, screamed something about nothing. My security, former cast-offs I'd raised from the dirt and who now stood behind me like a wall, put him on the floor before he took a second step. Not roughly, just firmly. Castle ended up on his knees on the floor of my office. The fake air, in the tower of the man he'd thrown onto a garbage heap, a full circle. You remember how in the first act I laid the Vohl ring on the table and said, "Thank you for the clarity"? That was the answer. 6 months later, on his knees, and then Castle, defeated, humiliated, spat out the thing he shouldn't have, the thing he himself didn't fully understand. You still, he rasped, you still don't know who you really are. You think you've won? You don't even know why they brought you to us. My mother knows. Serafina knows who you are. And if you knew, you'd be on your knees, not me. I froze. The city burned on beyond the window. Security held Castle. And I stood there, feeling grandfather's watch tick on my wrist with its hitch, loud, right in my ear, impatient. Why they brought you to us. Serafina knows who you are. The pieces I'd been gathering for 6 months suddenly swung and reached for one another. Take him out, I said quietly. They took Castle out, and I stayed standing at the window. And for the first time in the entire war, it wasn't revenge that interested me. It was the truth. That night, I finally did the thing I'd been putting off for 24 years. I opened grandfather's watch. It had always ticked wrong, with a barely audible hitch, as if there were something extra inside. I'd chalked it up to the age of the mechanism. But after Castle's words, "You don't know who you really are," I understood. Grandfather hadn't left me the watch out of poverty. Grandfather, the only one who loved me, had left it because there was something inside. I opened the back cover with trembling hands. And behind the mechanism, in a thin hiding place no one would have spotted, I found 2 things. A tiny chip and a note, folded several times, written in a familiar old man's hand. I unfolded the note. And my grandfather's voice, dead for over half a year now, spoke to me from that scrap of paper. Rayden, if you're reading this, then they've thrown you away. I knew they would. And I knew that only then would you begin to search. Listen to me closely, boy. You are not a Vohl. You never were. You are the thing they stole. You weren't adopted out of charity. You were taken. And behind you stands a bloodline this family fears to death. I didn't manage to tell you everything. They watched me to my last breath. But I left you a key. Find the rest yourself. You're stronger now than I ever was. And when you find the truth, Rayden, I ask one thing of you. Don't become like them. They take revenge out of fear and greed. You be above that. Take everything from them. Yes, but then find her. Find your real mother. She's alive. And all this time she's been waiting for you to come back. Forgive me for not protecting you from them. I loved you, boy, For real, grandfather. I sat in the empty office, at the top of the city I'd built from nothing, holding the note of a dead man who turned out to be the only one who'd told me the truth my whole life. Grandfather knew, the entire time he knew. And he hadn't left me money, hadn't left me the holding, hadn't left me protection. He'd left me the truth, because he understood while I was weak, the truth would kill me, and when I grew strong, it would set me free. The watch stopped ticking wrong, because I'd taken out the extra part. I slid the chip into a reader. Knox helped decrypt it, but even his skills only got us part of the way. Highest class hidden asset detected. The truth about your origin. Access. Partial. For full access, the missing key is held by data redacted. The chip opened halfway. My real mother's name had been scrubbed deliberately by someone who very much didn't want me to learn it, but one thing came through the static, clear as a blow. She had not died. My whole life I'd been told, if I was told anything, that I was taken in as an orphan, that there were no parents, that I was a nobody from nowhere. A lie. My mother was alive, and she wasn't some nameless pauper. She was someone the Vohl clan feared so badly that they'd stolen her child and hidden him among the trash for 24 years, so he'd never learn who he was. I looked at the scrubbed name and felt something inside me change forever. Revenge had been the warm-up. The city had been the warm-up. The real game was only beginning. Serafina sensed I was closing in on the truth. I don't know how, maybe through her people, maybe by the instinct of a cornered animal, but she understood. If I dug my way to the thing she'd hidden for 24 years, she was finished, and so she went all in, on the dirtiest move of the entire war. She didn't strike at my assets, not at my money. She struck where I hadn't shielded myself, because I considered it sacred. She kidnapped Pixie. Through the remnants of Scar's old protection, the ones I hadn't finished off because I'd judged them too small to matter. Serafina snatched the girl right from her stall, 12 years old. Red pigtails. The very child who, on my first day at the bottom, had given me the last bowl of noodles. Pure loyalty. Priceless. And then a message came to me. From an unknown number, but I knew who it was from. The chip from the watch, and your silence about what you've learned. In exchange for the girl, you have 24 hours. Otherwise, you'll never see her again. I read it, and the cold that had held me through the entire war cracked. Big. Real. For the first time since the evening they threw me out of the Golden Hall, I felt something rise inside me that just wanted to come and burn it all to ash. They'd touched Pixie. A child. The one clean thing in this dirty city. I stood, and my hands shook. Grave, seeing my face, went pale. He'd never seen me like this. Vera grabbed a phone. Knox was already running to the screens. And the system, cold, merciless, mine, produced exactly what was needed. War knowing, emotional state rage, critical level. Rage equals error. Serafina is acting not from strength. She is acting from fear. A person who kidnaps a child to barter for silence is not a hunter. It's a cornered animal. And fear always has a hole. Calculate. Find the hole. Don't let her see your rage. Your rage is the one thing she's counting on. Calculate. Don't feel. Save the girl with cold, not fire. I closed my eyes, took a breath, and brought the cold back. The heaviest cold of my life, because beneath it boiled a rage I had no right to release. No one panics, I said evenly. We get Pixie back by morning, and we give Serafina neither the chip nor silence. We take the girl and leave Serafina with nothing. Listen, and the machine spun up. Grave knew every tunnel under the city, including the ones leading to the old holdings of Scar's protection. In an hour, he'd worked out where they might be keeping the child, an old warehouse on the edge of the eastern sector, reached by an abandoned branch of the underground rail. Knox hacked the cameras of the whole district and found the right spot in 20 minutes. Saw the car, saw the movement, saw Pixie. Vera went through the protection's finances and found who they owed, whom we could lean on so that half the kidnappers would simply scatter before we even arrived. And when I needed people and resources right now, in the middle of the night, I called one person, the only one in the city who was both strong enough and close enough.
Avelina, I said. I need help. Not business. Personal. They took a child. The silence on the other end was brief. The address, she said.
Cold, businesslike, without a single question. My people are already moving. And Rayden, a pause. The one who touches children to pressure you, he's already lost. Remember that. By dawn, we took the warehouse. Quietly, cleanly, without losses. Half the kidnappers really did scatter thanks to Vera. The rest were taken by Avelina's people. And I walked into a cold, dark room and saw Pixie tied up, tear-streaked, but whole. Seeing me, she burst into loud sobs. Boss, I knew it. I knew you'd come. I told them my boss will take everything away from you. I untied her, and for the first time in the entire war, for the first time since that evening in the Golden Hall, I embraced someone. Tight. While the cold slowly returned to its banks. No one will ever touch you again, I said quietly. Never. That I promise you. And Serafina, that morning, was left with nothing worse than nothing. She'd thought she held a trump card, a child she'd trade for my silence and the chip, and instead she'd exposed herself, shown me her fear, shown how far she was willing to go, and lost the one thing she still had. The initiative. Rayden Vohl. Last weapon. Lost. Initiative. Fully on your side. State. Despair. Understand, Serafina. For 24 years you thought you held me by the throat. As it turned out, I held you the whole time. I just waited for you to reach for my sorest spot yourself and show me yours. But the most important thing happened, not at the warehouse. It happened during the rescue. While Knox was hacking the district's cameras, he snagged something else. A call. Serafina, panicking that her plan was falling apart, hadn't called Damien, not Castle. She'd called someone third, someone whose voice I'd never heard. Knox intercepted a fragment. The voice was distorted, deliberately, through some kind of equipment. But I made out the words. He's gotten too close, Serafina said, and in her voice there wasn't just fear. There was terror of the person she was speaking to. He opened the watch. I'm sure of it. If he finds her before we do, what do I do? Tell me what to do. And the voice on the other end, calm, cold, sexless from the distortion, answered just one thing. Don't panic. He still doesn't know the main thing, and he won't. We've been preparing for this for 24 years. Let him take the city. The city is trivial. When the time comes, we'll take everything from him at once, including her. The connection cut off. Knox raised his eyes to me, pale. Boss, who was that? That's not Damien. That's not Castle. That's someone higher. I looked at the transcript and felt a chill crawl up my spine. Not my usual one, but a foreign, unfamiliar one. 24 years ago, someone had been preparing. Someone had stood behind Serafina the entire time, behind all her schemes against me, since my earliest childhood. Not Damien, who simply didn't notice me. Not Castle, the empty shell. Someone third. Someone who had stolen me from my real mother, who had financed my exile, who had waited 24 years, and this someone wasn't afraid I'd take the city. Because to them, the city was trivial. The system blinked, and for the first time there was something like alarm in it. New object detected. Source of pressure on Rayden Vohl. Identification. Impossible. Object protected at a level exceeding analysis. Object's marker matches the marker on the chip from the watch. The same mark. On the chip my grandfather had left me, and on the one who'd stood behind all of this from the very start. Grandfather had known not only about the Vohls, grandfather had known about the one who was higher, and it was from him, not from Damien, not from Serafina, that grandfather had hidden me in the slums, in plain sight, where no one would think to look for an heir. I put the chip away, put the watch away. It ticked evenly now that I'd taken the truth out of it. And I understood that the war I'd taken for a war against the Vohl family was only the first move in a game someone had begun before I was born. But before going after the one who was higher, I needed to finish with the Vohls. Completely cleanly. I gave them a chance. One. The last. Not out of mercy. I'd left mercy in that golden hall along with the ring. But because I wanted the ending to be earned, so that afterward, when it all collapsed, no one, not even I, could say I hadn't given them a choice. I came to Damien, in person, to the house I'd been thrown out of 6 months earlier. I walked the same corridors where I'd gone unnoticed for years. I sat down across from the man who'd called me a non-performing asset. Damien looked at me, and for the first time there was no contempt in his narrow brown eyes. There was something else, the calculation of a man who'd realized he was losing and was looking for a way to survive. "I know who you are now," he said. "The architect, my adopted son." "I'm not your son," I said calmly, "and never was. We both know it, but I didn't come for that. I came to offer a deal. Strictly business. You love business after all." Damien inclined his head a little. He listened. "The Vohl holding is a corpse," I said. "I can collapse it tomorrow, completely, to the foundation, or not. The terms are simple. You leave the business. Quietly. You hand over what's left to a management I'll appoint. You publicly restore the honor of a man named Grave, whom you broke 20 years ago for his blueprints. And you tell me everything you know about why I was taken from my real mother." I held the pause. "Do that, and I won't destroy you completely. I'll leave you enough to live out your days. That's more than you ever gave me." Damien was silent, and I watched the struggle on his face. Part of him, the calculating, surviving part, understood it was a good deal, the best he could count on. But the other part, the pride of an old predator who'd sat at the summit for half a century, couldn't accept that he'd been cornered by a boy from the slums, the trash he'd thrown away. And pride won. As it always does with men like him, Damien stood, his face twisted, and from under the calculation crawled the old familiar contempt. "A deal?" he hissed. "You're offering me a deal? You, a foundling? Have you forgotten who you are? We picked you up, off the street, out of the dirt, fed you, clothed you for 24 years out of charity. If you'd stayed in that ditch where I returned you, you'd be alive and quiet, and you crawled back here to dictate terms. You're a nobody. You were always a nobody, a piece of trash we picked up for some reason." Picked up. You know there are words that become a trigger. Damien had just pulled it himself. I stood, slowly, and looked at the man who just voluntarily refused his last chance. "Picked up," I repeated quietly, and smiled the same smile as in the Golden Hall 6 months earlier. "Thank you for the clarity." I turned and walked to the exit, down the same corridors, past the same walls. And behind my eyes, the system unfolded the final line. The one I'd been waiting for 6 months. All conditions for the full collapse of the Vohl holding are met. Last chance offered and rejected by the opponent. Moral grounds. Flawless. Deploy the final cascade? I stopped in the doorway of the house I'd been thrown out of. I turned back one last time, at Damien, at his pride, at the empire with less than a day left to live. "Deploy it," I said. And beyond the windows, over the whole city, the rivers of light began to converge on a single point. You know how an empire falls, one that took half a century to build, in a single day. For 6 months, I'd been laying stones under the wheels of the Vohl clan, quietly, one at a time, so they wouldn't notice. And that morning, I simply took away the hand that had been keeping them afloat all that time, and let gravity do the rest. The loan went first. Remember that lone castle took out in a panic from the snowbank against the holding's assets? The one he'd stuck his own head into? At 9 in the morning, Avelina crashed it, coldly, by contract, without a single violation. She simply demanded immediate repayment under a clause Castle, in his frenzy, hadn't read. The holding didn't have that kind of money on hand. The assets pledged against the loan passed to snow in half an hour. Vohl holding. Collateral assets. Lost. 9:34 a.m. At 10, the tenders went. Every contract still hanging on Damien's old connections ruptured all at once, because the partners, seeing that Snow had pulled out of the game, understood the ship is sinking, and they ran from it like the rats they basically were. Partners. 11 of 14 active contracts terminated. 10:18 a.m. At 11, the reputation went. The business press, which had long had finished materials sitting ready, Vera prepared them. Knox sent them out at the right moment, rolled it all out at once. How the Vohls broke Grave for his blueprints. How they overpaid, stole, leaned on people. How Castle's breakthrough project was theft and an empty shell. The city, which only yesterday had trembled before the Vohl name, in an hour stopped being afraid of it. And when a predator stops being feared, it's dead, even if it's still breathing. At noon, there was a board meeting, or rather, what was left of one. I didn't go there myself. Why would I? I watched the broadcast from my tower, and Avelina was beside me. She'd insisted on being present. "I want to see you finish what you started," she said. The cold Avelina Snow, it turned out, also knew how to savor justice. At the emergency board meeting, the Vohl holding declared insolvency, publicly, in front of the press, which by then was impossible to stop. Damien sat at the head of the table, the same table where, 6 months earlier, he'd declared me garbage, and listened as his empire was carved into pieces in front of the whole city. And Castle broke down right there on the air. For 26 years, everything had been given to him, and he didn't know how to lose. They don't teach that when you have everything. He wept openly, ugly, like a child who's had a toy taken away that he considered his by right of birth. His face white as paper, then red, then white again. And then the men from the bank came over to itemize property against the debts. And the first thing they took off him, right there, in front of the cameras, was the gold watch, the same one that he'd flashed in every room 6 months earlier, that he'd bragged about in the slums when he came to gloat over the upstart. They took it off his wrist the way you peel a tag off unsold merchandise. And Castle stared at his bare wrist and couldn't understand how it had come to be that the trash now had a tower, and the air, an empty space where his watch used to be. I watched this and quietly touched my own wrist. Grandfather's old watch, scratched plain, the one the whole hall had once mocked. It ticked evenly, and it was worth more than everything Castle had ever owned, because it held the truth, and he held only gilding. Vohl holding. Status. Insolvent. 12:47 p.m. Control of assets. Transferred. Objective achieved. Damien didn't grasp the scale at once, and when he did, his legs gave out. Not from age, from the realization. Everything he'd built over half a century, everything he'd thought untouchable, all of it had been taken by one man in 6 months. The man he'd personally, with his own hands, driven to the slums and left to die, calling him a non-performing asset. 100 times he'd underestimated the threat. 100 times. And the threat turned out to be so much bigger than he could imagine, that it simply dissolved him into the dark. "Dad wanted me to become a human being in the slums," I said quietly, to no one, looking at the screen. "I became a city." Sorry for exceeding expectations, Avelina beside me smirked, barely, at the corner of her mouth. "You're a frightening man, architect," she said. But there was no condemnation in her voice. There was something else. The respect of one predator for another. "No," I said. "I'm just a man who knows how to count. They were the frightening ones. I only showed them the bill." But the collapse of the Vohls wasn't the main thing that day. The main thing I'd saved for last. Grave. Remember the old man? The former chief engineer of the Underground Rail, whom the Vohl clan broke 20 years earlier on a fabricated case, accused of an accident he didn't cause, stripped of his blueprints, his name, his honor, who spent 20 years repairing other people's junk for a bowl of porridge in the slums, while the whole district thought him insane. Who was the first to shake my hand? Who waited for his question for 20 years? That same day, while the city was picking through the remains of the Vohl holding, I did the thing that maybe all of it had been for. I publicly restored Grave's honor. Knox and Vera assembled everything. The old archives the Vohls thought destroyed, but that Grave had kept, the correspondence, the proof of the framing, and the investigator, the one I'd turned after learning his father had been broken by the same method, personally testified and confirmed it all on the record. The accident 20 years ago had been staged. Grave was innocent. The Vohls had fabricated the case to steal his blueprints for the Underground Rail, the very ones I later built the transport heart of the new city on. The city learned that the man it had considered, for 20 years, the cause of people's deaths was in fact a victim, that his honor had been stolen along with his work, that the Underground Rail, now carrying half the city, was his creation, not a Vohl breakthrough. I staged it publicly, with the press, with cameras, so that everyone who'd twirled a finger at his temple for 20 years at the sight of old Grave, the one who talks to pipes, would see who he really was. Grave stood on the stage, in a clean suit we'd dressed him in, hunched, gray-haired, with hands covered in old burns, and when they handed him the document of full exoneration and the official recognition of his authorship of the Underground Rail, the old man wept. Not from pain. I'd seen Grave hold back pain plenty of times over 20 years. This was something else. He wept from the thing he'd waited 2 decades for, and had stopped hoping to receive. "Thank you, son," he said to me afterward, quietly, when the cameras had been switched off. "You know, for 20 years, I didn't wait for the underground rail. I could have died without it. I waited for someone, just one person in the world, to believe I wasn't to blame, that I wasn't a killer, just to believe it." He squeezed my hand with his scarred ones. "You didn't just give me back my honor. You gave me back the right to look people in the eye again. And that not the fall of the Vohls. Not the collapse of the holding. Not the gold watch taken off Castle. That was the real victory. Because I'd brought the Vohls down out of calculation, but I'd raised Grave up out of love. And you know what? Raising up turned out to be sweeter than tearing down. Grandfather was right. Grandfather, as always, turned out to be right. Grave, status, honor restored, name cleared, authorship recognized, debt of loyalty paid in full."
System note. This is the difference between you and them. Thanks, system, I know.
And in the archives of Grave's framing there, in the deepest part where the Vohls had buried the ends, Knox stumbled onto something else. A single mark, a marker on the old documents through which the fabrication had been run 20 years ago. The same mark, as on the chip from grandfather's watch. As on the one who stood behind Serafina. Grave hadn't simply been broken by the Vohls. Grave had been broken by the one who was higher than the Vohls. The one who, 24 years ago, had stolen me from my mother. It all tied into a single thread. And the thread led to a figure I hadn't yet seen. To a player for whom the Vohls, the underground rail, and the whole city were just minor pieces on a board. But more on that later. First, the Vohls came to me themselves, out into the rain. By evening it began to rain, cold, fine, nasty. And into that rain, to the gates of my tower, came 3 people. Damien, Castle, Serafina, the Vohl clan, or rather, what was left of it. Without the holding, without the money, without the name that only yesterday had opened any door. They stood at the gates of a glass tower grown up on the spot of the junkyard they'd thrown me onto, and they asked to be let in. I looked at them from above, from the balcony of my floor. The rain lashed at their expensive, now meaningless coats. The system calmly highlighted over each of them. Damien Vohl, net worth, close to 0. Castle Vohl, net worth, 0. Serafina Vohl, net worth, negative. I went down, not because I wanted to let them in, because I wanted them to say the thing they'd come for to my face. They stood in the rain, and each begged in his own way. Damien through cracked pride. He who'd never begged anyone, now squeezed out the words, as if they physically hurt. "Rayden, I was wrong. I underestimated you. Give me a chance. We can come to terms. You're a businessman now. Teach you what you don't know about real business. You're offering to teach me business," I said evenly. "To the man who took everything from you in 6 months? You still don't get it, do you? It's not me learning from you. There's nothing left for you to teach me." Castle, he just whimpered. For 26 years, everything had been given to him. And now, without the watch, without the money, without the surname, he didn't know how to be a person. He clung to the gate bars with wet hands. "Brother Rayden, we grew up together. Please forgive me. I was a fool. You won't leave me with nothing. We're family." "We were never family, Castle," I said. "You beat me my whole childhood and cried to father that I'd started it. Remember. I remember everything." I looked at his bare wrist. "It must feel strange without the watch. That's all right. You'll get used to it. I spent 24 years getting used to living with nothing at all, survive, and maybe you'll become a human being." His own words. Damien's words from the Golden Hall returned with interest. Castle flinched, recognizing them. And Serafina didn't beg. She was smarter. She tried the last thing she had left, manipulation. She raised her tear-filled eyes to me, the very gaze she'd deceived crowds with for 24 years. "Rayden, sweetheart," her voice trembled tenderly, like a plucked string. "I was always on your side. Remember, I begged for you. I protected you. I was the only one. Serafina." I cut in quietly. And the system blinked over her. Mask, victim, essence, the architect of your downfall. I see straight through you. Literally, save your tears. They don't work on me anymore. They stopped working the evening. I saw the dry, satisfied gaze under your wet handkerchief. Her face froze. The mask cracked for good, and I stepped back. From the gates. From all three of them. You know what's funniest? I said. I could destroy you completely. To the end. Erase you. I have the power, the means, and heaven knows the reason. I swept my gaze over them, wet, pathetic at the gates. But I won't, because you're already nobody, and I don't make war on nobody. Making war on you now would be like kicking a puddle, pointless, and it dirties your shoes. That, by the way, is the highest revenge. Not finishing them off, but showing them there's nothing left to finish, that the enemy is so small he's not even worth your hatred. Rage is for equals. And to them I left only cold indifference, the heaviest thing you can give someone who spent 24 years wanting you to suffer. I turned to leave, and then Serafina broke, for real. In despair, losing everything, she screamed at my back the thing she'd hidden for 24 years. But even now, even at the bottom, she couldn't say all of it. You think you've won? Her voice shattered into a shriek, drowning out the rain. You haven't understood anything. You don't even know whose blood runs in you. You're not an orphan, Rayden. Your mother is alive. And Serafina suddenly cut herself off. Her eyes went wide with terror, as if she'd frightened herself with what she'd nearly said. As if even here, having lost everything, she feared the one whose name had nearly slipped off her tongue. You have no idea what will start when she finds out you're alive. Run, Rayden. Run before she comes for you herself. I froze. When she finds out you're alive, not when you find her, but when she finds out. As if my mother hadn't been waiting for me. As if my mother were not salvation. As if my mother were something to be feared. I slowly turned back to Serafina, but she'd already clapped her hands over her mouth, white with terror at her own words, and was backing away into the rain. What does that mean? I asked quietly. Serafina, what does that mean? But she didn't answer. She grabbed the stunned Castle by the sleeve and dragged him away into the rain, into the dark, and Damien stayed standing at the gates alone, old, ruined, and in his narrow eyes. For the first time, there was neither contempt nor fear. There was incomprehension, as if even he, the patriarch, didn't fully know what his family had been dragged into 24 years ago. The rain washed the last traces of the Vohl clan off the asphalt. I went back up into the tower, and for the first time in a very long while, I let myself exhale. In my apartment at the top, 2 people were waiting for me. Pixie, now in a clean oversized hoodie instead of the huge borrowed jacket, washed, safe, curled up in an armchair, nodding off, but stubbornly waiting for me, and Avelina standing at the window, looking at the city, ice calm as always. Pixie perked up when she saw me. Boss, did you chase them off? The ones at the gates? I saw from the balcony. They were standing in the rain like wet rats. I chased them off, I said, and ruffled her red hair. They'll never touch you again. No one will, I promised. I know, Pixie said importantly. You always keep your promises. She yawned hugely. I'll just close my eyes for a minute and fell asleep, right there in the armchair. The child who, on my first day at the bottom, gave me the last bowl of noodles and became dearer than the whole empire I later built. I covered her and went to the window where Avelina stood. We stood in silence, shoulder to shoulder, looking at the lights of the city. My city, grown out of the junkyard they'd thrown me onto, to die. You got it all, Avelina said at last, her voice level, but I'd already learned to hear the shades in it no one else could. The Vohl holding fell. Half the city is yours now. The financial world that didn't know you yesterday fears you today. She turned to me. Ice blue eyes, a direct gaze. What now, architect? A man who has everything usually doesn't know what to do with himself. I took the chip out of my pocket, the one that had lain inside grandfather's watch. The one with my real mother's name scrubbed off it. I turned it over in my fingers. The city was the warm-up, I said quietly. Revenge on the Vohls was the warm-up. I looked at the chip. Someone stole my mother. 24 years ago. Hid me in the slums so I'd never learn who I am. And someone higher than the Vohls, someone even they feared, stood behind all of it the entire time. I clenched the chip in my fist. Now I'm going to find her and find the one who tore us apart. and then we'll talk. Strictly business. Avelina looked at me a long time, and then she did the thing I didn't expect. She covered my fist holding the chip with her cold palm. Then you'll need a bank, she said, and someone who doesn't trust people but trusts your numbers. The corner of her mouth twitched. I'll go with you. To the end. Consider it a business decision. A business decision, I repeated. Strictly, she said, and we both knew we were lying. And it suited us both. Not a kiss, not an embrace, just her cold palm over my fist and a promise to go to the end. For the two of us who don't believe in people, that was more than any words. That same evening, everything converged on a single point. The way it always converges at the most interesting moment. First came the news from Knox. He flew into the room, pale, with a laptop. Boss, Serafina, she's gone. She fled in the night, right after the gates. Abandoned castle. Abandoned Damien. Abandoned everything, vanished. He swallowed. And she left a note on her old account, the same one Vera found. I decrypted it. It's just one line. He showed me the screen, Serafina's handwriting. One sentence, run, before she comes for you herself. The same sentence as in the rain. Serafina wasn't running from me. Serafina was running from the one whose name she feared to speak, even after losing everything, from my mother, or from the one standing behind my mother. Then, Knox again, even paler. And one more thing. I've been decrypting the chip from the watch all evening. The one with the scrubbed name. I almost got it, boss. The last layer. Your mother's name. It's almost surfaced. Look. He turned the screen toward me. Through the static, through 24 years of deliberate scrubbing, letters were coming through. Slowly. A name. The name of the woman who'd given birth to me and who'd been stolen from me. And at that very moment, my phone rang. An unknown number. I looked at the name surfacing on Knox's screen, looked at the ringing phone, and something inside, whether the system or just instinct, told me, it's connected right now. These two things are one. I picked up. Silence, then breathing, and then a voice. A woman's, warm and cold at once, unfamiliar and yet recognizable in every cell, as if I'd heard it before I'd learned to hear it all. A voice that should have vanished from my life 24 years ago. A voice I'd never once heard in my conscious life, and that I knew anyway. Rayden, the voice said, this is your real mother. I stopped breathing. Knox froze beside me. Avelina turned from the window. I know what you did to the Vohls, the voice went on, and in it was a strange mix of pride and sorrow. I've been watching all these years. You grew up strong, stronger than I dared to hope. But before you decide you've won your war, you must learn the truth. All of it. Not the half the old man left you in the watch. Who? I found my voice with difficulty. Who are you? Why did you give me away? Grandfather wrote that I was stolen, that the old man loved you. The voice gently interrupted. But he didn't know everything. I didn't give you away, Rayden. I hid you. I hid you in the slums, among the trash, where no one would think to look, because it was the only place in the world where you were safe. From the Vohls? The voice gave a laugh, and that laugh sent a chill down my spine. The Vohls were watchmen, small ones. They were paid to keep you weak and to keep you from learning who you are. I wasn't hiding you from them. Then from whom? I asked. A pause, a long one. From the same power I was hiding from myself, the voice said. From the one that stands behind Serafina, from the one whose mark you found on the chip. The voice grew quieter, more serious. Rayden, listen to me carefully. You built a city. You think you're strong now, and you are strong for this world. But the world you're now entering, having learned who you are, it's far larger. And they're your system, your money, your city. They're trivial, smaller than the envelope Damien threw at you was to you. I instinctively looked at the system there behind my eyes, and for the first time in all this time, it produced the thing it had never produced before. Asset detected exceeding the scale. Class, error, object beyond analysis, cannot be appraised, cannot be scanned. Object protected by a power exceeding the system. This is the first object the system cannot read. My system, the one that, in 6 months, had cracked open a whole city. Cracked open every Vohl, found the weak link in any person, The one that showed the true price of anything at all. For the first time, it had met something it couldn't appraise. That meant only one thing. Someone or something had entered the game that was stronger than everything I'd built, stronger than anything I could build. I don't understand, I said quietly. You will, my mother's voice said. Soon, I'll come to you myself, but I have to warn you before I come. Serafina was right about one thing when she told you to run. The voice trembled for the first time. Because by taking down the Vohls, you've made too much noise. You've announced to the whole world that the heir they considered dead for 24 years is alive, and now they know where you are. Who? I asked. Who knows? And my mother's voice spoke its last words, quietly, with that strange mix of love and fear I'll never forget. They're coming, Rayden, and this time for you, truly, not for the city, not for the money, for you, for who you really are. A pause. Get ready. I'll be there soon. The connection cut off. I slowly lowered the phone. Knox stared at me, not breathing. Avelina stepped closer. Pixie slept in the armchair, not knowing that the world she'd fallen asleep in had just ceased to exist. I walked to the window. The city lay below, an ocean of lights, my empire, grown out of a junkyard. I'd taken it from the people who threw me out to die. I thought I'd won the war. It turned out I'd only just learned that there is a war. I raised my hand. Grandfather's old watch ticked evenly now that I'd taken the truth out of it. Across the edge of my iris, one last time that evening, a thin golden line ran and went out, as if even the system understood that what came next was beyond its strength. A second ago, my mother's voice had been in the receiver. They're coming, and this time, for you. Truly. I looked at my city, and for the first time in 6 months, for the first time since I'd laid the Vohl ring on the table and said, thank you for the clarity, I didn't know what would come next, but I knew one thing. Whoever was coming for me, they wouldn't meet the boy who'd been thrown onto a garbage heap. They'd meet the man who'd built a city out of that garbage heap, and we'd talk. Strictly business.